Edible? Just watch. I'm Shidalu. Oh my god. Episode 1. Let's talk steak. Mainly because my producer keeps seeing all these guys on dating apps claiming they really know how to cook steak.
I can't stand such people. All think they cook steak well. I'll get an expert to explain it.
So my job is to really break this down, take this overdone topic, and explain it so well that no one else has anything to add. In this episode, I'll walk you through the science behind it. I'll also show you how I make steak taste great. Enough talk. Let's get into it. So, why is it so hard to fake steak skills? Honestly, desserts are way more useful. My producer told me a lot of guys on dating apps say they're great at cooking steak, really know good steak, and can even butcher meat. That kind of thing is honestly really hard, because steak is actually about more than just science. Even though I believe in science, I truly think there's a lot of art to it too. Now, online everywhere, you'll see many ways to cook steak. Getting meat to that perfect doneness really does take true artistic artistry. If you only half know what you're doing, you're probably better off learning desserts, more methodical. Follow the recipe, add small artistic touches. Skip this step. Take Basque cheesecake, for example. Stick to the recipe, brown the top. Tastes great, but steak is really hard. So don't brag about cooking steak to impress girls. Trust me, my producer will crack up. Wow, so if steak is already hard to cook, let's bust some of those myths. For example, this idea that high heat locks in juices sounds plausible at first, but it's actually a myth. Here's why. With a good steak, you'll see a lot of smoke, but have you ever thought about what causes it? That smoke comes from the juices evaporating and carrying fat with them, creating that hazy look. It's made up of tiny oil droplets and steam, so you can't lock in the juices. The next thing you need to think about is the internal temperature. And internal temperature is hard to get just right because meat is a poor conductor of heat. Once you understand that, when it comes to cooking steak, everything else starts to make sense. At home, you just can't get that steakhouse, open fire flavor. With a home stove, you can't get truly restaurant-level results. I actually agree with that. When I ate at one of the world's top steakhouses, I saw some incredible overhead broilers. The kind that can char fish until it's crisp. You'll also see people cooking over an open fire, which is really famous. Take Australia's fire door. They cook over wood and charcoal. That kind of intense heat instantly forms. Steak crusts, home stoves can't. But does that mean you have to give up the art of cooking steak? I don't think so. Here's what we need to know. Steak's internal temp is key. Meat is a poor conductor of heat, and once you know how to balance that, you can still make a great steak. All right, if you grasp open fire and broiler steak, next learn internal temperature, crust formation, and meat's low heat conductivity. Then you'll go from pretending to knowing steak perfectly. What is accelerated sous vide? It uses an app to calculate heat capacity and the gap from the steak's internal temperature. You enter the amount of water, the size of the steak, and the temperature, and it'll tell you maybe it can cut the time from 3 hours to just an hour and a half, or even down to the minute. Then I can get the steak to the ideal internal temperature. If you're lost, keep listening. Let's become real steak guys who know steak. My producer put together an online steak cooking formula. Let's take a look. First, prep. Thaw the steak. Next, pat the steak dry. Then, start searing the steak. And finally, slice it up and dig in. As for the prep, it says to thaw the steak first. It says, thaw frozen steak overnight in the fridge or under running water if rushed. Just make sure it's fully thawed. Next, pat it dry, then cook it. When it comes to seasoning, sprinkle coarse salt and black pepper on both sides. Let it sit so seasoning soaks in. Those 3 steps are spot on. Let me explain why they matter. If not fully thawed, steak's center stays near 0 degrees Celsius or below freezing. Then, when you cook it, as I mentioned, meat is a poor conductor of heat. If pan hits 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, broiler 300 to 400 degrees Celsius heat can't reach the center. You'll just end up with a burnt outside and an icy center. Roast turkey at 145 to 150 degrees Celsius takes 3 hours. Can't boost heat to cut cook time. Heat won't penetrate meat. 145 degrees Celsius, 10 minutes. 1450 degrees Celsius, 1 minute. Nope, just think. Of course not. So full thawing is crucial. Meat conducts heat poorly. Second, pat the steak dry, because if you don't dry it off, there are 2 serious consequences. One is nasty oil splatter and smoke, but what I think is even worse is that your steak won't taste good. Why won't it taste good? When the meat is searing hot in the pan, if the surface isn't perfectly completely dry, the surface moisture will absorb most of the heat coming from the pan, then turn to steam and quickly escape into the surrounding air. Do you know it takes 540 calories to vaporize water? That means the heat in the pan is basically wasted. Next is seasoning. There are a few schools of thought on seasoning. I've seen quite a few credible scientific comparisons on the topic. When it comes to seasoning steak, you need to do it early. You definitely don't salt it after searing. You have to salt it before searing, because it does 2 things. First, the salt gets into the meat more easily. That even seasoning makes the steak taste much better. Second, there's the benefit of osmotic pressure. It lightly dehydrates the surface. Then, once brine reabsorbs, the meat turns fully seasoned. Just remember the takeaway. Pre-seasoning is very important. Next, let's start searing the steak. Heat the pan, add the steak, rest it, sear again, rest, and so on. I think this part is mostly scientifically correct. What matters most is resting. Most people just don't rest the steak because they don't know what it's for. And I totally get that, because in Chinese or Taiwanese cuisine, there's no resting step. No dish has that step. Rarely use large cuts. What's our biggest cut? Braised pork knuckle or belly. But those are braised, not seared. So you don't need to rest them. First, heat a sturdy high-heat pan like a cast-iron skillet until lightly smoking. Next, add the steak. You'll hear it sizzle loudly. And that means the pan is truly hot enough already. Now start searing. Sear each side for 1 to 2 minutes until browned. Let's start with the pan heat. Right now, there are basically 2 camps. One says hot pan, hot oil. The other suggests cold pan, cold oil, or no oil. If using a non-stick pan, cold pan, no oil works fine. One version is the cold sear method, taking longer. It can take 10 to 20 minutes, often much longer. And you'll end up with a steak without much of a crust, but with very even doneness and a really delicious result. That's one camp. The other camp is the one I mentioned earlier, the hot pan, hot oil method. Then the steak hits the pan and goes sizzle, and it forms a beautiful crust. But when it comes to internal temperature, you really have to manage it carefully. How do you do that? With lots of resting, the heat from the outside can move inward evenly. Second, the juices inside won't be moving around as much. They can slowly settle back into balance, so less juice runs out when you cut into it. Wrap it tightly in foil while resting. If your kitchen is very hot, and kitchens usually are, I don't think it matters that much, because you won't be resting it that long. But if you really care, I think you can cover it with a lid or wrap it in aluminum foil. But the kitchen's often a battlefield. You rarely have time to fuss with foil, unless steak is the only thing you're cooking. Wrapping it in foil simply keeps it warm. But steak conducts heat poorly, so it cools slowly. Doesn't heat up or cool down easily. Think about it. If meat were a good conductor of heat, then when you take a bath or soak in a hot spring, you'd end up sous videing yourself. That obviously doesn't happen. Next is searing it again, or this whole resting part. This is really important. If your meat is really thick, then you'll need more rounds of resting and searing. Don't assume those steak formulas online that say sear once and rest, then sear it again and rest again mean your steak is ready to eat. If your steak is thick, you'll probably need to sear it 3 or 4 times and rest it 3 or 4 times. If you're cooking something where doneness really matters, like duck breast for example, searing it 5 or 6 times can be perfectly reasonable. But over low heat, so thickness matters. At most supermarkets and warehouse stores, the meat is usually about 2 centimeters thick. For cuts like that, sear it twice and let it rest, and it'll turn out great. Rushed and experienced, 1 searing suffices. Then let it rest properly. A proper rest is crucial. I have to keep stressing this. Meat is a poor conductor of heat. So for heat to move through it, it takes time. You need to give the meat that time. The second thing is letting the juices fully settle back so the meat can reabsorb them. My producer put together a few tips. Pick a steak that isn't too thick. 2.5 to 3 centimeters is easier to control. I totally agree. A very thin steak is hard to cook, and a very thick one is hard too. Around 3 centimeters is actually a really ideal good thickness for cooking beginners. Of course, if you can get some really premium good meat, like filet mignon, it's absolutely great when cut thick. What if thick-cut steak's undercooked? It's amazing, rare. That's fine too. Nice crust, rare to medium rare inside, absolutely delicious. But what really matters is this. Season ahead. It's crucial. Next, the oil needs to be very hot, but that's only the visible part. The oil only heats if the pan is hot. Pan 1 centimeter thick oil, 0.5 centimeters deep. You can think of it as adding 0.5 centimeters of thickness to the pan. That's roughly the idea. So when people say the oil needs to be very hot, if the pan is thin, just use a bit more oil. That mimics the effect of a thicker pan. Even a thin, non-stick pan, thin as a ping pong paddle, can still sear a great steak. Yes, just use a bit more oil. That gives it the effect of a thicker pan. So high oil temperature means you need more oil. But if you're using a thick cast iron skillet, you really just need the pan to be very hot. Just to be clear, this is the hot sear method. This isn't the popular, trendy cold sear cooking method. A lot of good steaks in bars are done with the cold sear method because it doesn't create much smoke. You know, if it makes too much smoke, it's not a bar anymore. It turns into a seafood restaurant. Later on, I picked up this clever trick from bartenders and bar cooks. I was like, damn, that works too? Super low heat. Turn your butane stove down to the lowest flame, like an ancestral hall candle. It can cook a steak to perfection. Next is checking doneness. The best way to check doneness is to stick in a thermometer. Now, there are lots of methods online, like pinching your earlobe, pressing the tip of your nose, or touching your chin, or making an OK sign and feeling your fingertip, or doing that Guan Yin hand pose and feeling your fingertip, or just touch your ring finger to feel how firm it is and judge whether it's rare, medium, or well done. I think those methods are fairly accurate, but I'd still suggest you do that only after the steak has rested properly. When the meat is still piping hot, poking it won't be all that accurate. But once you have enough experience, your hand and your brain will correct for that automatically. Still, I recommend using a thermometer. A thermometer, the kind you stick into the meat, is only about $6. The value for money is incredible. You'll instantly become a real steak guy. You'll really know your stuff, right? Use a thermometer to check steak doneness, okay? Next, my producer also put together some notes on oven then sear and low temperature cooking. Oven, then sear. Bake first, then sear. Or reverse order. That means sear first, then oven. That's more how restaurants do it. Because in restaurants, it saves manpower. If one person has to stand at the station watching the steaks, it's easier to just set a timer, sear the outside till crisp, then transfer it to the oven. Now, when it comes to heat transfer, it's mostly happening through radiation. You'll also get some conduction from the tray, but it's mainly radiation. That raises the internal temperature, but it takes longer. Less direct than pan searing. Solid, yet advanced technique. And ovens are a pain to clean, you know? I rarely even want to use one. Cleaning inside is such a hassle. If one pan can do it, I'd rather just use one pan. Next up is the popular sous vide cooking method. You use a sous vide circulator, vacuum seal the meat and put it in, then cook it low and slow for a long time. Can it make beef softer and more tender? I'm honestly a bit skeptical. Yet it keeps meat's internal temperature perfectly steady, which I truly admire. But if you really wonder if sous vide, low temp aging, or cooking can make beef shank incredibly super tender, I tried a strange ultrasound method. In a sous vide setup, in that constant temperature water bath, there's ultrasound involved. That can make the meat more tender. But that kind of tenderness is still a bit different from filet mignon. Beef shank, can it get tender enough for cutlery? Definitely. It's so interesting. But on that note, I really think Taiwan, China, has a lot of great things now that go really well with steak. But for purists, like salt and pepper, I personally still love that. For example, really great salt like fleur de sel from Guérande in France. Honestly, Taiwan, China has great salt flakes now too. You can find really good ones around the Sigu district. Or, for example, we also have algae salt made in the Japanese style. It contains a lot of compounds from broken down algae, like free amino acids. That can bring the meat's umami to another level. And, if you're open to it, I really recommend trying Taiwan-aged soy sauce or soy sauce with steak. When we make steak sauce, there's actually a kind of all-purpose sauce. You use the fond stuck to the pan, all that good stuff. We use oil or water or a little wine to loosen it up a bit. After reducing it, mix in some mustard, reduce it again, and you've got a very French-style sauce. What I do is rinse the pan with some soy sauce, and you'll see the fat and liquid start to separate. Then add a little butter, just a small spoonful. It'll emulsify and come back together, then pour it over the steak. It makes an amazing sauce. All right, high heat won't lock in juices. Resting the meat is what actually keeps them in. Of ease in life doesn't just make your life better, it also makes your steak taste better. If there's anything else you want to know about food science, feel free to leave me a comment down below.
At this point, I have a goal. If we hit 10,000 subscribers by year's end...
4 digits? Let's try again. I said 1,000.
I'll line up a bunch of anime works for Shidalu to roast. If you're interested in this idea, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Share it with your friends. And comment with any works you think I should cover. Bye-bye!